So let's start with the Iran war. What's been announced? What's your perspective on what you've heard so far from the president?
Well, I hope that at last this war, a little over 100 days is over. I hope the war is over. But the question is, why were we in the war in the first place? We've spent nearly $1 billion a day. The Strait of Hormuz, they're saying, will be reopened. Well, it was open before we started the war. And we are a long way from what Donald Trump promised and what it looks like he's going to deliver. It looks a lot like where we were before any of this started.
Does the Senate need to approve whatever has been agreed to, this memorandum of understanding, the framework, whatever it's being called?
If it is to be sustainable, and that's the whole point of an agreement, it needs to come through the Congress. The decision to take us to war in the first place should have come through the Congress. And so I think it's past time for Congress to assert itself. I am heartened that I've heard a few Republicans say that it ought to come through the Congress because we don't, these things need to be sustainable over time so that all the parties that are a part of the agreement can take some comfort in that. But it's also the reason why I am introducing my own war powers resolution today, because the declaration of war in the first place is clearly within the purview of the Congress. This president has run roughshod over that. He's taken us into an illegal war. It spiked gas prices. And if you look geopolitically, China has done it pretty good as a result of this war. Russia, because of the spike in gas prices, is doing better, even as they wage war against Ukraine. This has not been good for America or its credibility in the world.
Are we safer?
I don't think so.
Why not?
No. Well, you have the issue with the enriched uranium. That has not been addressed. We don't know how it's going to be addressed, if it's going to be addressed. Listen, President Trump walked into office, and we had an agreement already with the Obama agreement.
Which he canceled and got out of.
Which he canceled. He never explained why he wanted to get out of it. And
said it was a bad deal.
It was the worst deal in the world. Well, we'll see where we land on Friday. But by all reporting, the regime is clearly still in place. The stickier issues regarding Iran and its ability to get a nuclear weapon, which it cannot have. There's no evidence that the details around that have been worked out. He's gotten the strait reopened. Well, the strait was open before he started the war. And the regime is very much in place, and it seems like the folks who've stepped up are even more hardline than their predecessors.
Let's talk about some Georgia politics. First thing, it's primary day in Georgia, statewide runoffs. And also, as I understand it, Senator, the legislature will meet, I think, tomorrow to begin consideration of redrawing district lines in Georgia for 2028. Give me a read on both.
Well, on the gerrymandering issue, this is a dark moment in our country and in the effort to have a multiracial democracy. The Supreme Court did a lot of damage to our electoral system. They gave a license to southern states to take us back to a time that feels more like 1956 than 2026. And what we're seeing is governors, state legislatures all across the South come back into session in order to draw the lines in such a way as to give craven politicians an outsized voice, allowing them to pick their voters rather than the voters picking the people who will represent them. I mean, think about that. This is election season. Election season is about the voters picking their representatives. And what we're witnessing right now is politicians working overtime as a result of this horrible decision to pick their voters.
So let's talk about the Supreme Court for a second. Is it your point of view, Senator, that the Supreme Court gave up on the idea of a multiracial democracy, or it went back to the Constitution, which did not envision it in the first place?
We are seeing a Supreme Court that is an extreme court. They are behaving as partisan hacks in many respects. And this has been going on for a while.
You know what I'm getting at, though. The Constitution did not envision what came out of the civil rights movement. Okay, the civil rights movement had to create a different reality. So is the Supreme Court going back to the original interpretation of the Constitution? Meaning that it did not envision a multiracial
Well, that's
democracy.
true. No, that's true. Look, Thomas Jefferson said that, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed with their creator, with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Words that Dr. King called sublime words of cosmic proportions, he says. But he was a slaveholder. And that is the complicated history of the American family story as we approach this 250th anniversary.
Right.
But the beauty and power is that they put those sublime words on paper. And the story of America is to work to get the country to live up to its ideals. So no, black people weren't among, when he said all men, he didn't mean all. And when he said men, he only meant men. So thank God for the civil rights movement. Thank God for the women's suffrage movement. The process of becoming a multiracial democracy where everybody has a voice has been just that, a process, and they're moving us backwards.
The Supreme Court is.
The Supreme Court is moving us backwards. They are enabling Donald Trump and his partners in Congress to diminish the voices of the people who I think are well poised to hold them accountable.
What effect will that have in Georgia? Is that firing your people up?
I think it is. Absolutely. I think this is a case.
So when you look at the governor's race and the Senate race, what a practical political effect on the ground do you think that has?
As I move around Georgia, ordinary people are very upset by this. And I think, when you try to diminish people's voices, they don't take kindly to that. And I've seen it up close in my own races. When I ran for re-election in Georgia, they looked at the anatomy of my victory and they came after it with surgical precision. They changed the rules around the runoff, and just as we were going into the runoff, I'd already won in the earlier runoff for my initial election. They said, well, you can't vote the first weekend of the runoff. And they offered some misinterpretation of an old Georgia law. The officials in Georgia said our hands are tied because they understood how the voters in my coalition show up. So they tried to cut them off at the path. They said their hands were tied, and so I decided to untie their hands. I sued them. And then the folks who said their hands were tied then went and appealed the decision rather than focusing on setting up the infrastructure so people could vote. I had to win 2 appeals just so people could vote the first weekend of that election. 70,000 people voted that weekend, including college students who were home for the Thanksgiving weekend. I won by 100,000 votes. They are playing games with people's voices.
And when those, in your words, games get played, it creates a backlash or a fire effect.
Evil always goes too far. And I know that's a statement that may get people's attention. I'm not saying that the folks on the other side or the right are evil. But the actions to diminish people's voices is a moral question, which is why I make it the first chapter in my book, The Crooked Places Made Straight. People deserve to have a voice. And I think evil always goes too far and therefore has within itself the seed of its own destruction. In political terms, this is a overreach, and I think that the people in our coalition, this vast multiracial, multi-generational coalition of conscience that sent its first African-American senator and its first Jewish senator to the Senate in one fell swoop, is going to rise up with other people of conscience, including Republicans and independents, and send John Ossoff back to the Senate and Keisha Lance Bottoms to the governor's mansion.
The book is called The Crooked Places Made Straight from Isaiah. Let me ask you this as a basic opener question. Do you ever pray for President Trump?
Oh, all the time.
In what way?
Well, he needs a lot of prayer. And we're instructed in Scripture, and it's something I believe in, to pray for those who are in power. Why wouldn't you? They have tremendous influence. Donald Trump has tremendous influence. His behavior, his policies are consequential for people I care about, for the 11 million people that I represent in the Senate. So yes, I pray for the president, but I pray not only with my lips, I pray with my legs, I pray with my action. And in the places where he is hurting people, I'm pushing back every single day, pushing back against these cruel policies.
Do you pray for him in that he is misguided, or that you pity him, or that you need him to see something he has yet to see?
I am focused on the humanity of all of us and on building a country that honors our full humanity. And the truth is, Donald Trump has unleashed a kind of poison in the ether that divides us. And so, yes, I'm concerned about him as a human being. I am more concerned about the soul of our nation, about the character of the nation. And it's the reason why I wrote The Crooked Places Made Straight. It is my sermon in the public square. I still believe in this country. I think that there are those who are trying to weaponize despair in order to reign over us. We are in a real fight for the heart and soul of our democracy, and I'm not about to give that over to wannabe autocrats. People I love, including John Lewis, who was my parishioner, gave too much blood and sacrificed too much.
You write in the book that you're a Head Start baby.
Yeah.
There's a headline in Politico today that the Trump administration intends to shift significant parts of the Department of Education out of the Department of Education. One is the Civil Rights Division, another deals with particular education programs. How do you evaluate that?
It's more of the same.
What do you mean by that?
They are literally at war with the very idea of equity, the very idea of inclusion. They've turned equity into a curse word, and they've made it illegal. But the scripture talks about equity. There's some 2,000 verses in scripture that tell us how to treat the poor. And so as a pastor who serves in the Senate, I continue to bring my values around equity, around creating a nation whose promise and whose dream is big enough to embrace all of our children, to the policy work that I do every single day. I'm a Head Start kid. I am an Upward Bound kid. That's another federal program that put a poor kid who grew up in public housing on a college campus so that I would know that I belonged. And when it came time to go to Morehouse College, there were Pell Grants, low interest student loans, and college work study. All of those things together created a narrow but realistic path for a kid who would be the first college graduate in his family. What keeps me up at night is that it would be harder for me to start from there and make it here, a U.S. Senator, 4 degrees behind my name, a life of joy and possibility. It'd be harder for me to get that done now than it was
harder
then.
now
Harder now.
in 2026 than when you began this journey, what, in the 80s?
Yes, I was a kid who grew up in the 80s.
Harder now than in the 80s?
Certainly. It would be harder for me to get from Caton Homes housing projects to the U.S. Senate now than it was in the 80s. And as you move
Does that make you
around,
mad?
It makes me mad and mad enough to do the work. But you feel it as you move around, talk to ordinary people.
Is that the crux of the despair or frustration in our country?
Absolutely. Over the last few decades, and if we are honest, across Republican and Democratic administrations, we have seen growing wealth inequality. The people in our country sense in their heart that it's not working for them, and they are right. The data shows that they are right.
And they may not know all the numbers, but they feel it.
Yeah, and I've seen it up close as a member of the Senate. You know, I was proud of the fact that because I got elected and we flipped the Senate, we passed a bill that for the first time gave Medicare the ability to negotiate the price of prescription drugs. The first thing you ought to ask yourself is, Why would you have to pass a law
To do that in the first
to
place.
get the person who's buying the product in a capitalistic society the ability to negotiate? One word answer to that: big pharma, lobbyists, special interests. So we had to pass a law. Proud that we did it, but why did we have to pass a law? And then when we passed it, it was for 10 drugs. 10 drugs.
Right.
And it took 4 years. It would only come into fruition 4 years down the road. These are huge concessions made to the well-connected, big money interests that have too much of an influence and outsized voice in our politics. So whether you're talking about prescription drugs or dealing with the eco crisis and the need to get real about getting to clean energy, whole range of issues, the people know that their voices are being squeezed out of their democracy. And that for me is not just a political issue, it's a moral issue, and it's what I'm fighting for.
Since we talked about the 80s, where your journey began, more or less, you also write in the book about mass incarceration, which began in the late 1980s, but sped up dramatically in the mid-1990s. When parts of my audience hear mass incarceration, they just hear, well, people who committed crimes are in prison. What's wrong with that? That's what we're supposed to do. Lock them up.
Yeah, people should pay for their crimes. But the United States of America, the land of the free, is the mass incarceration capital of the world.
And looking at the statistics in your book, it's not close.
No nation comes even close. We've got more people in prison in our country and a greater percentage of people in prison in our country as a result of this growing massive carceral state. There are people who benefit from that. There are lobbyists who support private prisons and the industry that it creates. And there are way too many of our citizens who are warehoused in these facilities. And now I fear that because of the draconian ways in which the Trump administration is approaching the whole issue around immigration enforcement, we're seeing the buying of these huge detention centers all across our country. I think that this may very well be the next wave of what has been a very sad story in the American experience. I went to Social Circle, Georgia, a town of 5,000 people. They voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. The mayor of that city looked up one day and read and learned by reading the Washington Post that the big bad federal government had bought a warehouse in his city where they were going to warehouse 10,000 inmates or detainees. So they tripled the size of a small town, largely red town of 5,000 people. The mayor and the city manager said to me, our water infrastructure can't even handle this. Our sewage infrastructure can't even handle this.
They had not been asked.
They had not been asked. They read about it in the newspaper. I'm deeply concerned about that. My conscience is shocked by the ugly specter of our nation warehousing people like sardines in a 10,000 bed facility.
And if I read correctly, if you're an African-American man in this country, you're 23 times more likely to be incarcerated than a white man?
I don't want to mistake the data, but much more likely. And this is nonviolent drug-related offenses. And folks who say, well, if you do the crime,
Do the time.
do the time. Black people and white people, the data shows, use and sell drugs at roughly the same rates. We should probably have a whole program to talk about this because I have much to say about this. But maybe I can summarize it in this way. I've pastored in New York, Harlem, in West Baltimore, other places like that. In the 80s and the 90s, with the epidemic of crack cocaine in these cities, we saw a whole approach that was centered around lock them up and throw away the key.
3 strikes, you're out, et cetera, et cetera.
And 3 strikes and you out, right? All of that.
All of it.
And then years later, we saw the opioid epidemic, largely rural and white And eventually, we've come to see policymakers say, you know, this is really a health issue
Not a crime
and
issue,
not a crime issue.
but only when white people were
I think
suffering.
we should apply that wisdom across the board and find ways to help heal people and heal our country.
Before I let you go, did you write this book because you detect, Senator, not a spiritual problem within the Democratic Party, but a reluctance to talk spiritually on a national level?
I think it's unfortunate that Democrats cede so much of the language and space around faith and values to the right, especially since the right, in my view, has it wrong. They certainly have it wrong when it comes to standing up for the most vulnerable members of the human family.
Because you've had a conversation with the Speaker of the House about this, and if I understand it, it went something like this. I have my personal piety, and that makes me good, and your point is personal piety is fine. I respect that, I admire that, but if you're not looking at systems, you're missing some of it.
Scripture talks about systems. Isaiah is interested in systems. In the very first chapter, he says, your princes are rebels and companions with thieves. Everybody, this is in the Bible, is chasing after a bribe. They're not standing up for the widows and the orphans. That's not Raphael Warnock talking. First chapter of Isaiah. Mm-hmm. And so he has little or no patience for politicians who are corrupt and who are so focused on themselves that they're not fighting for the
And
people.
Democrats should get more comfortable using that language?
We should bring our values to this conversation, and we should hold each other accountable.
Senator, I appreciate the time.
Great to be with you.
Thank you very much.